So this young extortionist wanted to charge me 25 cents or 50 cents to deliver the paper, and I was not very happy about that. So I talked to my older brother, Pat, and Pat had a suggested solution. He had a beautiful dagger. It was about an 8-inch blade with a naked, the handle was a naked woman carved out of what looked like gold. I'm sure it was some kind of metal coated with gold, and in a brown leather case. And he said, put this in your bag and he'll leave you alone. So the next day when I came by to deliver the papers, this young tough guy, his name was Shooty, said to me, where's my 50 cents? And I said, I must have it in my bag. So I reached in the bag and I pulled out this knife and pointed it at him, and his eyes got big as saucers, and he said, no, that's okay, you can deliver it, I won't bother you. And he never bothered me after that. I think he realized that it wouldn't be a good idea to try to mess around with me. So I ended up delivering the papers for about a year or two in the Mississippi courts, and then I got a bigger route that encompassed the area that we were about to move into. We moved from 5109 Lindale to 227 53rd Avenue North, and this was right on the city limits, and it was as far north as you could live and still be within the city, which was a requirement because my dad was a fireman. But we bought a house that was bigger. It had 2 bedrooms, and my dad and his friends were able to expand the attic and put an additional 2 bedrooms in the attic along with a bathroom and a storage space. So we moved to 53rd in 1954, I believe, and we built a garage. I helped my dad build a garage there. I remember doing most of the shingling work on the roof of the garage and helping him put the walls of the garage up and lift the windows into place and so forth. So that was a good experience. But it was also a good place to live. We had a big vacant lot across the street where we could play baseball, and we had a bunch of neighborhood kids that would gather there, and we would play baseball and sometimes play touch football. And we were still only a block away from the Mississippi River, which meant that I could walk down to the river in the morning before school when the weather was nice and put a worm on my hook or even some other kind of bait. Sometimes we used bread balls. We would soak bread until it was pliable and kind of make a hard ball out of it and put it on the end of a hook. And that was a great bait for catching carp. And you could catch good-sized carp, which were fun to catch, but they were not fish you wanted to eat. However, I remember one morning I found a helgramite, which is the larvae stage of a dragonfly, and I put that on my hook, and I caught a 4.5-pound smallmouth bass. Unfortunately, the bass were out of season at the time, and so I pretended like I didn't know that was the case, and I took the bass up to the house and gave it to my mom, and she cleaned it and we ate it. However, I was a little bit afraid because I ran into a mailman and I thought he worked for the government and he was going to tell the police or whatever that I had taken a bass out of season, but nothing ever happened. Anyway, we also had to be careful because the river could be quite dangerous. There was one early spring day when I was just walking along the river edge with my friend Tony Dorff, who was a classmate from Our Lady of Victory, and we found a partially hidden raft, and the ice was coming off the river, but we thought we could take the raft from about 57th down to 53rd where I lived and jump off there. So we found a couple of poles and we got the raft into the water and we started floating downstream. But the raft, the water was very fast and very cold and full of ice, and the raft got caught up on a huge rock that was under the surface of the water, and it looked like it was going to tip over, and we were screaming and praying and trying to pry the raft loose. We eventually did get it off the rock, and we floated downstream and got down to 53rd, but if that raft had tipped over, the water was so cold that I'm sure we both would have drowned in the river. It was quite an adventure, and it was just a great adventure living that close to the Mississippi River. There were always things to do along the river, things you could find, and not just fishing, but swimming in the summertime and rafting and actually building. We built a little cabin out on one of the islands from driftwood, and we had a great time living there. Also, that was about the time that I started high school in 1959, graduated from Our Lady of Victory in 1958. I guess it was the fall of 58 that I started as a freshman at De La Salle. And I met a friend of mine, Steve Alexander. Steve started school a year late. I started school a year early. In kindergarten, my mom had me take a test at the University of Minnesota, and they tested me and determined I could read well enough to start school early. So I started kindergarten when I was 4, and I started Our Lady of Victory when I was 5 in first grade. And so when I was going to De La Salle as a freshman, I met Steve, who lived down around Camden. And Steve, at 15, had a driver's license and access to his dad's new car. His dad had just bought a 1958 Edsel. And I remember Steve coming and getting me, and we went for a ride in the Edsel. And Steve asked me if I wanted to drive. Well, I was only 13 at the time. He was 15. But we had a great time driving around Brooklyn Center. And that was how I started to learn how to drive.